Good morning, and welcome to this session on conflict theories in sociology of education. In a previous lesson, we've looked at the importance of structure and function in education, and we've recognised that this may fail to realise conflicting views and conflicting interests by different people and different power groups within a group or organisation or class or school or community. In this lesson, we seek to look at some of the reasons for conflict and some of the best ways to understand and deal with it, and the ways in which a sociology of conflict understands that there are different groups in society, different genders, male, female. There's also different social groups, classes, upper class, working class, lower class, whatever terms we might use for these different groups. We recognise that there can be different interests, different sense of power and opportunity, and this can bring a sense of conflict. And then we also discuss the ways in which listening, understanding, seeking to clarify the causes of conflict can help us to work towards a resolution in which the different viewpoints are well recognised and acknowledged, and then some middle position is reached in which both groups feel valued, heard, and given opportunity. So let's begin with some definitions. Firstly, conflict is real, or it can be imagined or perceived in various ways, and it's a disagreement over the allocation of resources, meanings, interpretations, rewards and goals, methods that are used. Often there's a difference in what is the best way to respond to a situation or a need or a goal. This can involve ways in which we look at evidence, look at different viewpoints, look at vested interests, different emotions that may be involved, and different values that may be involved. Now, in a more authoritarian system, those who feel they've got more experience, the right age, those who feel as though they have been given a greater position of authority may feel that they, in the best interests of everyone, should express their values and views over those of some others. In a more egalitarian group or society, there is a sense in which more people are being listened to. And there's a sense of truth in both. At times, the teacher, the school leaders must use their sense of authority, but at other times, it's incredibly valuable to listen to the views of the students and the parents and everyone else involved. This, as we said, can involve looking at the evidence. This can look at the different interests, look at the different values, look at the sense of security, self and threat to self, the ways in which ideas and outcomes are being valued or being not given a sense of value. There's also a number of benefits that we can see in the ways in which conflict is viewed and understood. And if we look at various resources, such as God's toward developing a biblical theology of conflict, where he looks at Romans 12 to 16 in his doctoral dissertation, we see that God points to some of the values of dealing with conflict well from a biblical perspective, and you may find this helpful. And he offers a number of definitions and quotes here, and in these quotes, he quotes authors who've said that conflict is a fact of life. Whether in church or school or classroom, people are going to have different viewpoints and feel heard or not heard. Conflict can even be a necessity. That is, it's an opportunity to express the differences and say the reasons why we feel differently about things. And sometimes these can be emotional reasons, and we can dig deeper and find reasons for these emotions. Conflict can be seen as part of the human experience, being human, feeling different ways at different times, and it can take place in cultures at different levels of intensity and value. And we'll also look in this class at emotions and the ways in which an understanding of the different emotions can help us to understand the ways listening to and valuing different students and their emotions can be useful. In this section of the class, we'll look at the importance of understanding emotions and their roles in thinking, and the emotions wheel, and some theories on emotions and the value of emotional intelligence, before moving on to consider the role of science, humanities, arts in helping us to engage with all aspects of emotions. We can even consider a Bible reading such as Galatians 5, which it says, walk in the Spirit, and the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, in order to bring a more positive culture to our classrooms and schools, and to watch out for desires of the flesh that can war against the fruits of the Spirit and the goodness that they bring. That'll lead to a more fruitful aspect of teaching. And we can also bring prayer and worship into our classrooms, where we thank God for the privilege of being a teacher and a student and for learning, in order to appreciate the importance of emotions and positive emotions in our classroom, and in order to engage with a deeper understanding of emotion so that we're each better off in our understanding. Conflict can occur when we don't appreciate the different perspectives and the different aspects of human nature and the different reasons people have different emotions. And if we understand conflict and emotion further, then we'll have a more positive classroom environment and a more fruitful teaching experience. Yes, conflict is part of human experience, and it takes place within. We can have conflicts within as we desire something, but we recognize that may not be best for us. We might desire to eat more and more of certain foods, ice creams, chocolates, and sweets, which may not be healthy for us. And so there can be conflicts within as we realize the need for exercise and a better diet. There can be conflict within a group. And so as a group of students gather, a group of students sit next to one another, there can be conflict there, or within the larger group of the classroom, there can be conflict. Some students can say they feel tired, they feel less interested. It's important to then start to ask, why do you feel tired? Why do you feel bored? Why do you feel less interested? There can be conflict at the school level, at the community level, and at the international level as people have different values. Conflicts take place in every culture at various levels of intensity and around different ideas. Some are more violent, some are more caring for one another. Olson writes, conflict comes from living in a human world. And part of being human means that we have different desires and values, which can differ to the person next to us. And if you've got 20 students, there can be 20 different desires, 20 different viewpoints. And so understanding conflict can help us to understand these different viewpoints and the different desires. And so if you study Romans or Galatians or study different books of scripture, you can get a biblical perspective on not only the inevitability of conflict, but also, such as 1 Corinthians 13, the importance of love, or 1 Corinthians 5:22, the importance of the Spirit and the fruits of Spirit in addressing conflict. The truth is, conflict is going to happen, and knowing what to do and when conflict arises may be the best education and training that we might have. The value of conflict is neutral. That's not the dilemma. The dilemma is, what do we do? How do we handle conflict when it occurs? Different viewpoints will inevitably occur. Different values will inevitably occur. But the question is, what does one do when there are different viewpoints and different values? Do we listen to the different viewpoints? Do we seek to understand the different values and then talk them through? And then when they can't be resolved so easily, do we have strategies to handle these different values well? So being equipped to respond properly to conflict is incredibly valuable. Even Jesus faced conflict as Christian teachers when Ford describes the ways in which he was constantly facing at times the battle within, at the temptation of Jesus, the different views with his family and religious leaders and government leaders. His time in the Garden of Gethsemane wrestled with questions within. What's the cross mean? Is one willing to continue to be a servant, to face the challenge, even death on the cross, giving up self focus and bring salvation to others and to the world. So conflict and understanding are important as we understand the ministry of Jesus and the way he brings his good purposes to our world. Culture too is important when understanding conflict, and many have written on the nature of culture and conflict, and you might want to research and you might want to do your assignment on conflict in the classroom and society and culture as one of your assignments. Understanding conflict is basic to the resolution of conflict. So one of the first steps is to listen to the other and listen to the perspectives that they put forward and to show that you're listening, and then to go further and to show that you understand their perspective and what they're saying, and then to seek towards a mutually agreed resolution and midpoint. Conflict itself is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it can be very valuable for showing different viewpoints and perspectives and showing how people feel. The challenge is to find the right time to address conflict rather than to go in at the wrong time when people are ill-prepared and going to react instinctively out of fight or flight mode, rather than take more time to reflect on the reasons for the conflict and the steps towards its solution. There are many reasons why conflict's a necessary part of understanding each other, understanding the steps towards growth and greater understanding of the world in which we live, and developing and growing as individuals and families and communities and societies. Conflict can help to build the community, help to define and balance people's needs with the needs of others. And how people handle conflict is basic to who they are, whether they're a listening, caring person who's growing in character, or whether they are a more intuitive person who is acting more quickly without considering different ways in which conflict can be better addressed. The proper employment of the correct tool is particularly important in addressing conflict. What are the different tools that one has in one's tool belt that one can bring, such as listening, empathy, caring, concern, love, and appeal to reason, appeal to various reasons for difference, coming to a point of self-understanding as a Christian, prayer and worship and scripture as a logical thinker, perspectives as a person who has various interests, understanding those interests and needs. Some people even talk of different zones and different ways of understanding different aspects of conflict, which you may find value in looking at. It's also worth considering the context of conflict, ways not to avoid conflict so much as to understand the reasons for conflict and to work through conflict so that we come to a healthy resolution. We could think about how to fight well, fair, in positive ways. And I'm reminded in Ephesians 6, where it speaks of the armor of God. In the previous sections of Ephesians 6, it's spoken about family and ways they relate together, and workplace and way people relate together. And then we see the armor of God not as a separate section so much as showing that in the midst of conflict, it's important, yes, to stand, but it's important to bring the right tools and strategies and right pieces of armor to the conflict. And we see there the first piece of armor that's listed is the belt of truth. So the first strategy that's important, Ephesians 6, armor of God, in any conflict is focus on truth. What is the truth that's being addressed here? Second, we have the breastplate of righteousness. And so focus on righteousness and what is the right thing, and what would the righteousness of God that he's provided for us show here. And then we have the shield of faith. That is, if we're seeking to show faith in God and goodness and one another, what does this mean for the conflict? And then there is the helmet of salvation. If we're seeking the fullness of whole salvation and goodness, what would this bring to the conflict? And then there is the shoes shod with the direction to take us in the direction of peace. How does seeking to bring peace help here. And then there is the sword of the Spirit of God, and we've been reminded in Galatians 5:22 that the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and hope. How do we fight with a weapon that brings love and brings concern and brings joy and hope and new beginnings, rather than looking at the hurts of the past? How to fight well. Psychologists can provide us with insights that arguing can be a sign that you're deeply invested in the issue. Happily married couples, they say, don't argue less than couples with distress, but they argue differently. That is, they're good problem solvers. They're good at working through the different viewpoints, because every two people or more people are going to have different viewpoints and be invested in different resources that they value in different ways. And organisations that thrive also don't argue less, but they argue differently, working towards common goals. And psychologist Bruce Tuckman talks about how groups move towards forming a group, and then after a period of time where everyone says they agree, the differences in viewpoint and seeking resources are expressed, and there's a storm. And the norm that brings us out of the storm is a clear statement of these are the goals we're working towards. These are the plans and strategies that we move towards that in order that we might perform and do well. So conflict theory challenges the notion that a school or a teacher or a workplace or a family will be able to automatically avoid conflict and have no conflict. Challenges the notion that conflict is always wrong and negative. Conflict theory states that tensions and conflicts arise in the natural recognition of differences of viewpoint and differences of allocation of resources and status and power, because these are unevenly distributed between members of a group and between groups in society, between genders and between different classes in society and different cultures. So power can be understood as seeking control of the resources and the viewpoints and the decision-making, and there will inevitably be differences between individuals and classes and race and gender and culture and religion on these issues. These conflicts can also be engines for social change, as people in different groups recognize that there are certain steps that they can take to confront inequality and confront missing out. And conflict theory can be useful for teachers to recognize the value in any conflict of seeking to address inequalities that may exist, and a sense of not being listened to, a sense of not having adequate resources, of not being respected and valued enough. Conflict theory in psychology and sociology emphasizes looking at power and inequality and the ways in which social change and the need for it are recognized and brought about. It provides a lens through which teachers and school can recognize power imbalances and begin to develop strategies to address them. Understanding the causes of conflict and understanding power dynamics within groups can help us to understand the ways in which we can develop better strategies for giving students and parents and families opportunity for expression in safe ways. The important thing is to handle conflict well. So rather than winning with our view, rather than seeking to uphold our sense of value and identity, handling conflict well requires listening to and recognizing the viewpoint of the other. And as Martin Buber has written in his famous writing, I and Thou, it's important in any relationship to respect and value the other. Martin Buber, I and Thou, on the importance of respecting the other. So if we promote the empowerment of others and give them a sense that they're being listened to, if we encourage dialogue and engagement in which we talk through the issues and talk through logical understanding of the positions and the evidence, if we promote inclusion so that everyone feels as though they are listened to and valued, if we address biases and stereotypes so everyone is recognized for their individual differences, if we advocate for changes and policy changes where inequality exists, and if we support the marginalized and those who have less resources. Conflict theory can be useful for helping us to understand the reasons for conflict and for addressing them. And as I said, you could choose this in your assignment. Conflict theory can be seen in the lives of many of the great Christian leaders of history, in the life and ministry of Jesus. We can use conflict theory and understanding of conflict to understand the ways in which Jesus stood up to the religious leaders of his time. At times, even his family, he stood up to them. And he stood up to wrong thinking, if that would come into his own life. And he stood up for the inclusion of marginalized groups. And he stood up for the importance of love and compassion and justice and the love of God and the hope of God. And he was willing to sacrifice all and go to the cross and suffer in order that he might bring this emphasis on love and transformation and hope and salvation to our world. He paid a high price in order to bring a solution to the challenges that are faced in a world that can be racked by self-focus and selfishness and evil. Others too, like Martin Luther, focused on the inequalities of his time, and conflict arose as he challenged those inequalities. John Wesley too confronted the social, economic, and religious inequalities of his time, and he advocated for social justice and opposed slavery. Other abolitionists and reformists through history, and William Wilberforce and others, fought to end slavery and to promote social justice and the civil rights movement. And leaders such as Martin Luther King were involved in conflict, not as something to be avoided, but something that would be inevitable in order to bring equality and hope to the marginalized people of our worlds. And we can learn from that in our classroom settings, and we can teach others about that in talking to our students and our classes. Conflict theory can also seem to be useful in understanding the role of prominent leaders through history, such as Gandhi, leader of the Indian independence movement, promoting equality for the Indian people; Mandela, promoting equality for all people, particularly the black population in South Africa; Dorothy Day, Catholic social activist, working for equality; and many, many others too can be included in this discussion on conflict and conflict theory. These examples illustrate how understanding of the sociology and psychology of conflict can lead us to better understand strategies for bringing healthy resolutions to conflict, whether it be in our own mind when we wrestle over things through inner dialogue, or whether it be in the classroom when we wrestle over issues and we show love and compassion and listening and seeking to meet the needs of all students or in the school. All of these areas can be better informed by a greater understanding of conflict, and also by a greater understanding of emotions. Emotions are often overlooked as an aspect of critical thinking, overlooked as an aspect of effective teaching. Emotions influence perceptions and judgments and decision-making, and they influence motivation. They can motivate us, or they can switch off our motivation. They can lead us to biases or lead us towards truth. They can lead to tunnel vision or broader vision. They can promote impulsive action, poor action, or they can promote motivation towards right action. So theories of motion from the ancient Greeks and Plato, where he likened a white horse, the better emotions, and a black horse, anger and cranky emotions warring with one another at times, or Sigmund Freud's theory on motivations from the psychology of the subconscious, or William James speaking about arousal and emotion. There's much that's been written that we could benefit from reading about the fight or flight responses and best ways to respond. It can help us to understand emotional trigger mechanisms. What triggers positive emotions? What triggers negative emotions? How do students feel supported, or how do they at times feel unsupported? It's important for teachers and educators to be aware of these emotional triggers of negative behavior or more positive behavior, to be aware of reflexive emotional responses and how we can, through understanding, move forward in a positive way and create a positive culture in our classrooms. A conscious awareness of emotional responses and recognizing that it can take longer for a positive emotional response than a quick negative emotional response helps us to recognize the need to set aside time for the positive emotional responses that use the forefront of the brain to develop, and the need to help to avoid the crashes and clashes that can occur when the more quick-acting fight and flight responses kick in and we get negative outcomes. The benefit of communication is important. The benefit of teaching, emotional regulation, can be very, very important. So I encourage you to set aside some time at times in your classes to teach students to recognize different emotions and to recognize to say someone is angry is not to say that the whole of that person is anger, but rather to say that there has been a small light or trigger or dial on their dashboard that is saying to the face, express anger or fear or another emotion. It's not the whole of who they are, but rather it's an outcome of certain responses. And looking at these different faces, you may be able to recognize the different emotions that are being expressed. We're very much emotional people. It's part of who we are and how God has made us. And emotions can trigger different responses as the mirror neurons in our brain respond to the different images and different words that are said. We feel different emotions as we read through a story. Man rides in an airplane, falls out. Fortunately, he's wearing a parachute. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Fortunately, there's a haystack. Unfortunately, he misses it. Unfortunately, there's a pitchfork. Fortunately, he misses the pitchfork, and so on. And so our emotions can move quickly from one to another depending on the story that's being told, the situation that's being told. Plutnik put forward, Robert Plutnik's Wheels of Emotions puts forward a useful tool for teaching students and teachers about the positive emotions such as joy and trust and anticipation, and the negative emotions that can also be triggers in our brain, trigger responses such as sadness, disgust, anger, fear, and so on. And so the emotions wheel lists these at differing levels of intensity. And under the positive emotions, there are triggers and neurons that when the mind and situation are seeking to say, hey, this is a good situation, spend more time here, this is good music, this is a good relationship. And so hormones and electrical triggers are released in the brain to say, joy, this is a good thing, value it. And then trust, this is a good thing, value it. There'll be future good things, anticipate them. But at the same time, when there's a clash, when we seek a sense of injustice, there can be other emotions triggered within the brain, and they come up on our dashboard and say, watch out here, there's reason to be angry. You might want to put on an angry face, use an angry voice. It's not entirely who you are, but it is a way of expressing that there is a sense of injustice. Of course, a good strategy here is to talk through, how do you feel about this? What is your reasoning on this? And then there can be fear and terror. when we are scared. And so we might see a spider or a snake or something, and for some people, this will trigger. There's incredible danger here. One of the challenges, though, is these can get written into the subconscious and can just trigger, and people may not even fully understand these triggers. And it's important then to carefully talk through, a teacher or a psychologist or a social worker, to talk through, what do you think might have triggered this, and how can we better handle this, and how can we get you used to scary spiders and other creatures. And then there can be disgust or boredom, and then there can be sadness and a sense of loss. And so too, there can be triggers and written into our subconscious. You've been attached to that book or musical instrument, it's damaged or lost. And so there can be sadness at loss because we feel it's part of who we are. And again, talking that through, owning it, working through how do we move on, and a natural recognition that it could take days or weeks to get over that sense of loss is important. So understanding the different emotions can be very, very important, and having exercise time in the classroom where we talk about emotions and look at the way that people respond to emotions can be very, very valuable. It's interesting the ways in which people will say, you are emotional, and that can be seen as negative. But if they were to say, you are being logical, that would be seen as positive. And in reality, they're both important parts of the way we are, the way we exist, the way we speak. To be logical is one strategy that can be beneficial, but if it squeezes someone else out, there can be negatives. To be emotional can be beneficial if we're joyful and hopeful, and even an expression of anger can be beneficial if it points out that there's an injustice that needs correcting. So understanding emotions and what they point to is a very important aspect of who we are. Some people value, of course, being objective and saying, this is the way it is, over being subjective, this is the way I feel. In reality, they are both very important. And Søren Kierkegaard and others have described the modern society as a network of relations in which people talk about abstracts of this is the public, this is right, this is being logical. And at times, they don't recognize the imbalance and the conflict that is really existing. And at times, it's important for people to subjectively express, I feel intuitively this is not right, and then to explore that. Heidegger, too, was concerned about the loss of the emotional. And so our classes at times need to be objective, but at times it's important to have subjective agency where we encourage students to express who they are and how they feel and to express their emotions. It's important that we give opportunity to develop an emotional vocabulary where we express, I feel this way at times such as happy, sad, angry, and creative writing can be useful for exploring the different emotions. Drama can be useful for acting out different emotions. Practicing conflict resolution. That is, if conflict occurs, we could dramatically act this out. Practicing mindfulness, where we've had a disappointing experience, but we switch off the disappointing experience of the past and we live in the present, in hope. But we focus on breathing and we focus on, we might have something that we hold in our hands and we might focus on that as a way of switching off that which is causing us distress. We could use flashcards in our classes where we could ask students to choose a flashcard, and we could use them in different ways and ask them, if you feel confused, why do you feel confused? And you could randomly give these to different students and ask students to talk about how they feel when they feel disappointed, how they feel when they feel hurt. We could also use a feelings thermometer, where we ask students to reflect on how do you respond when you feel angry? What are some responses to stop and walk away, to count to 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000? to talk to an adult and talk through, I feel angry through the break, through recess or lunch. You can get out and go for a run. You can take a deep breath. You could take a nap and sleep on it. You could practice grounding techniques or other techniques. When you feel confused, you could have various strategies that you could practice and use. When you feel confident, you could reflect on, why do I feel confident? How can I build on this? What times a day do I feel more confident? When I feel bored or disappointed, what are some of the ways I respond? What are the healthy ways to respond? To stretch, to give someone a hug, to get out into fresh air, to exercise, to do a hobby or something we enjoy like drawing or music. So using the cards or a thermometer and talking about them can help to bring a more positive atmosphere in your classroom, and it can recognize the value of appreciating the value of conflict rather than the danger of forever burying conflict. There's lots of theorists who've written on this. There's lots of resources that are available on this, and I encourage you to think about applying these and using these. And as a teacher too, there will be days when your desires will conflict with those of the student in school. And so develop strategies. When they say you want, the school wants you to work umpteen extra hours and get paid umpteen much less money and whatever, there'll be a conflict there. And so you need to think, how do you handle this well? When parents come in and they say, little Johnny, I know he's been destructive and all of these things, but little Johnny's and some parents will say, the greatest child in the world. We love him. And so you've got to have strategies where there's conflicting viewpoints there. When you're anxious, develop strategies such as mindfulness and focusing on the present and breathing to handle anxiety. Seek companionship, others to help you that you can talk to, co-workers that you can talk to. Care for yourself, exercise, diet, working well and sleeping well, and having hobbies and interests outside the classroom and teaching. Prepare and plan ahead so that there'll be less anxiety, so that you'll have alternate strategies, so that you'll have alternate activities when some don't work and when the technology doesn't work. Change your mindset from negativity to the positive. Focus on the positive. Realize big problems can be seen as small problems. Embrace the stress and realize it can have positive outcomes. Practice emotional first aid for yourself and others. So just as when you're hurt, and first aid is don't poke or enlarge the cut, but rather cover it and treat it well. Be grateful and think of the things you can be grateful for. Work smarter and harder. Talk to others. Ask for help. Work through with others. Have a weekly and monthly and yearly and daily time table. Develop a gratitude diary where you write down things that you can be grateful for. So there's lots of strategies to help with teacher stress and anxiety and conflict, and I encourage you to practice healthy living in order that you might be able to pass that on to others. And if you're a Christian, I encourage healthy practices in terms of your spirituality and worship and reading the Psalms and scriptures there. Emotional intelligence for yourself and students and all people can be encouraged through reflection, social awareness, practicing problem solving, collaboration, and modeling and promoting healthy behaviors. And emotional intelligence can be important skill. Self-regulation for all of us can be important. Be aware of physical and mental symptoms of stress and conflict and develop ways to respond. Recognize the ways in which our head, heart, gut, and feeling can all work together, and recognize ways in which, as in the Enneagram, we're all different. We all have different ways of responding to emotion. Someone has said, I don't sing because I'm happy because I sing. Practice strategies that will help you to be more positive in terms of emotions, and also ways that will be of benefit to yourself and your class. If you're interested in psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, Google it. You'll find some great resources there on the ways in which cognitive behavior therapy, which talks about the ways our mind and thinking and our behavior and physical actions like exercise, we choose what we do in terms of the thoughts we think, the ways we behave, the exercise we do. And this can help us to handle the challenges of life well. So practice positive emotional activity and thinking, and pass these skills on to others. And in other classes, we could talk about the use of the humanities and the arts and music in order to develop further use of the many, many subjects that we can use in order to be better. So in summary, conflict is inevitable, but the way we respond will help to guide us towards positive outcomes. The way we respond can be helped by listening, seeking to better understand the causes, and seeking towards positive resolutions. And in our classes, having clear guidelines, having strategies to help address conflict, and making students aware of the nature and ways in which emotions can be handled can help make a better classroom. All of these strategies can be helpful, and I encourage you that if you want to choose this as your topic for your assignment, there's lots of resources that you could use. You could talk to me, your lecturer, and go to those resources, Google Scholar and others, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and other encyclopedias of psychology and sociology, and you'd find that there's a lot to explore here on the sociology of emotions and the ways a better understanding of emotion can lead to a better classroom culture and a healthier outcome for all of us, students, teachers, schools, and societies. I pray God's blessing on every area as you work with this, and I look forward to discussing further topics with you in further lessons ahead. Thank you, each one.